Most people didn't notice her when she walked across the range that morning. She was older than the rest plain, soft-spoken, with graying hair tied back beneath a ball cap that had no insignia. Her jacket was the first thing they saw. Frayed at the cuffs, faded green, stitched at the shoulder with a rough, uneven patch. It didn't match the standard issue gear. It didn't belong. Must have pulled that out of a surplus bin, one lieutenant chuckled as she passed. She didn't flinch, just carried the box of cleaning rods toward the weapons table like she had a job to do. They went back to their laughter, to their drills, to their world where uniforms meant rank and patches meant pride. No one saw the way she moved steady, deliberate, as if the dirt beneath her boots had once been redder. No one noticed the patch, but someone would. Soon. Stay with us till the end because this isn't just a story. It's a reminder of how easily we misjudge quiet people and how deep their history often runs. Leave a comment if you've ever underestimated someone, and don't forget to subscribe for more true, powerful stories like this. The wind rolled in early that morning, dry, blunt, and sharp-edged like everything else out near Redstone training grounds. Cadets had been up since 400, jogging tight laps in crisp formation, their boots hitting gravel like a metronome. Everything moved with purpose out here except her. She didn't walk like a soldier. Didn't dress like one either. She moved through the outer lane of the range with a carton of rifle brushes tucked under one arm and a battered thermos in the other. Her boots were scuffed, civilian issue. Her hair was silvering at the temples, pulled back in a no-nonsense knot beneath a sun-faded cap. She wore a green field jacket, at least a decade out of date too, short in the sleeves, stained at the cuff, and patched along the left shoulder with mismatched canvas. Nobody saluted her. No one even paused. A cluster of young officers by the obstacle tower broke into a low chuckle as she passed. "Looks like someone raided Granddad's attic," muttered Lieutenant Ryland Bishop, sipping from a protein shake as he leaned against the railing. "You see that thing on her shoulder?" "Is that duct tape?" another officer joked. "I swear it's duct tape." "No, man, that's a patch, like an old-school unit patch, real old," Bishop smirked. "Probably from some decommissioned kitchen battalion." They all laughed. Down by the weapons table, she set the box down and began her quiet routine. Cleaning rods, bolts, oilcloth. She didn't speak, didn't even glance at them. Private Casey Thorne, the youngest in the group and barely 2 weeks into his assignment, frowned as he watched her from a distance. Something about the way she handled the weapons scum, sure, exact, didn't sit right with how others were talking about her. She didn't hesitate, didn't check labels or instructions. She just knew. He nudged the lieutenant beside him. "You think she's prior service?" "Who?" "The janitor." Bishop raised a brow. "That lady's barely hanging on. She's probably some contractor the base picked up for cheap. You'll see plenty of them." Thorne didn't respond. His eyes lingered on the jacket. It wasn't just old, it was worn the way only real field gear got worn. Softened from sweat, wind, and weather, not fashion. The shoulder patch wasn't from any unit he'd ever seen. It wasn't even rectangular. It was triangular, blackened at the edge, like it had once been burned and stitched in with an almost reverent hand. It had no words, just the faint ghost of a shape, a downward-pointing arrow impaled through a broken ring. He reached for his tablet, military insignia database. He typed quietly as the drills continued around him. But the search returned nothing. No match, no unit, no history. The symbol didn't exist. Except it did right there on her shoulder. Back at the table, the woman finished her checks, poured a small measure of hot tea from her thermos, and sat down in the folding chair like she'd done this every morning for the last 20 years. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. She knew her place and she stayed there. The lieutenant's laughter faded. Cadets ran laps again. Thorne kept looking. And still, no one knew her name. They just called her the woman with the old jacket. But 20 minutes later, a black SUV with a 4-star flag on the dash would pull up to the edge of the range. And the man stepping out, the one they all snapped to attention, for would see that patch and forget how to breathe. Private Casey Thorne hadn't meant to keep looking, but the patch had lodged in his mind like a splinter. He sat on the edge of the gear trailer now, pretending to double-check inventory while sneaking glances across the field. The woman hadn't moved in 20 minutes. She sat calmly beside the weapons table, hands resting in her lap, sipping tea from a chipped steel thermos like she wasn't surrounded by people half her age who didn't know what to make of her. But Thorne wasn't the only one watching. Sergeant Danner, an old infantry hand turned range instructor, stepped out from the bunker with a clipboard and caught the boy's distracted stare. "Something wrong, Private?" Thorne straightened. "No, Sergeant. Just do we know who she is?" "Who?" He nodded toward the woman. "Her. The one by the weapons." Danner followed his gaze, then scoffed. "She's harmless. Been here longer than the gravel. Works contracts, support cleans rifles, logs ammo runs, fixes sights when they're off by a hair. No one calls her by name. She doesn't offer one." Danner glanced down the field, brow creasing. "But she's squared away, never late, never wrong." Thorne hesitated, then said it. "That patch, is it regulation?" Danner didn't answer at first, just stared at it from a distance. "It's not in the database," Thorne added. "I tried. No match in archive unit insignias." Now Danner turned slowly, folding the clipboard behind his back. "Then you didn't search deep enough," he said quietly. "Or maybe you did, and it's not supposed to be there." "What does that mean?" The sergeant gave a half shrug. "It means there are things even the Army doesn't talk about, things that never made the after-action reports." Thorne frowned. "But if she wasn't anyone, why would she still wear that?" "To remember," Danner said, then paused. "Or to wait." A whistle blew downrange. The next live fire set was up. The moment broke. But Thorne's thoughts didn't. Later, near the comms tent, he caught up with Corporal Mejia, who'd done 3 years on a joint recovery team. If anyone might recognize obscure insignia, it was her. He pulled out a sketch on his notepad, a rough copy of the triangle and broken ring. "You ever seen something like this?" She stared at it. Her face changed. "Where did you get that?" "I saw it, this morning, on someone's jacket." Mejia looked over her shoulder instinctively, lowering her voice. "That's not a patch you talk about out loud." "So you do know it?" "I saw it once, in a classified appendix during a briefing for Kandahar Airfield Recovery Protocol. Just an Imagino name. No caption. But the colonel presenting it stopped speaking when it showed up." "What does it mean?" Mejia met his eyes. "You didn't see that patch. Understand?" Before he could respond, the distant rumble of tires on gravel turned their heads. A black SUV with tinted windows had just rolled onto the range. Perimeter clean, armored, flying a general officer's flag. Someone important. Someone very important. The woman with the old jacket looked up, just once, then returned to her tea. But Thorne noticed something else. Her hand steady until no trembled as she set the thermos down. Not fear. Memory. Thorne couldn't let it go. By mid-afternoon, most of the cadets had moved on to obstacle training. The woman in the old jacket was still there, cleaning a sidearm with the same precise hands, the same quiet rhythm. The SUV remained parked by the outer barrier. No one had yet emerged. Thorne found himself back at the comms tent, hunched behind a weathered terminal where base traffic logs were synced. He wasn't supposed to be there, definitely not with the admin password Mejia had once let slip in passing, but something about that patch clung to his thoughts like smoke. He logged into the archive access shell, typed the words manually. Triangle, broken ring, arrow through center. No match. He tried again. Unofficial unit insignia. Black Ops. Ghost Division. This time, a flicker. One result flagged and sealed. Red border file. Access restricted Ghostfire. Class 4 black file. Authorized level, Omega, Joint Ops, deceased handler only. Thorne stared at the screen. He didn't even know what half of that meant. Deceased handler? What the hell was Ghostfire? He clicked anyway. The screen blinked white, then locked. He was immediately signed out. Moments later, a silent alarm tripped across the lower HUD. Comms room unauthorized query. Logged. Flagged. Thorne stood up fast. His palms were sweating. Private. He turned. Sergeant Danner stood in the doorway. The older man didn't raise his voice, didn't bark. He just looked at Thorne for a long moment before motioning him outside. They walked toward the edge of the range in silence, where the gravel met the sun-scorched concrete near the weapons shed. The air felt thicker now, the sky too quiet. Danner finally spoke. "You searched for something that was meant to be buried." Thorne swallowed. "I didn't know." "You knew enough." Danner stopped, crossed his arms. They called them Ghostfire. The last official reference was 15 years ago, and even that was a rumor. What were they? Tasks with high failure, no return ops. If you were sent in with them, you were listed as pre-expired in the system. That doesn't even make sense. No, it doesn't. That's the point. Ghostfire units weren't supposed to leave footprints. No ID, no home base, no medals, just fire and shadow. Thorne went quiet. So what happened? Danner's jaw tightened. Someone higher up got scared of how good they were. Or maybe how invisible. Their ops started vanishing from records. Then so did they. Decommissioned? Erased. Thorne looked back across the range, to the folding chair by the table. She's one of them. Danner didn't answer. He didn't have to. The black SUV door finally opened. Out stepped General Reese Calder, commander of Joint Tactical Operations. Battle-hardened, decorated across 4 theaters, known for his unshakable demeanor. He walked with purpose, his eyes scanning the range like he was tracking something only he could see. Then he saw her, and he stopped walking. No fanfare. No words. Just a sudden stillness, like the range itself had inhaled and held its breath. Calder's gaze fixed on the left shoulder of the old jacket. The patch. The triangle. The broken ring. The arrow. His face drained of color. Private Thorne, standing in the distance, felt it happen like watching tectonic plates shift beneath polished concrete. Something old had just broken the surface. Something none of them were ready for. General Reese Calder didn't speak at first. He stood motionless at the edge of the range, boots rooted in the dust, eyes fixed on the woman in the green jacket like a man who'd just seen a ghost. Not a metaphor. A ghost. One of his. For nearly 30 years, Calder had carried a face that others couldn't read, a tactical calm, forged through deployments, failures, medals, and blood. But in that moment, his stillness said more than any command voice ever could. Beside the weapons table, Mara Ellison didn't look up. She didn't need to. The shadow falling across the gravel told her enough. She set down the cloth she was folding and straightened, not sharply, not performatively, but with that bone-deep precision that never leaves some people, no matter how many years pass. Then, slowly, she looked up and met his eyes. A second passed. 2. Then 3. General Calder removed his cap. Behind him, Lieutenant Ryland Bishop paused mid-sprint at the far lane. He squinted, confused, recognizing the 4-star general and, somehow, the older woman. But his mind couldn't bridge the gap. He nudged the cadet beside him. "What's happening?" "I don't know," someone murmured. "Is she in trouble?" But Thorne knew. He didn't know the name yet, but he knew the shape of what was happening. Recognition. Real, heavy recognition. The kind that didn't come with applause or medals. Calder stepped forward. Only once. "Mara," he said finally. Quiet. Like a man not sure if he's speaking to the living. She didn't smile. Didn't answer. Just gave a single, nearly imperceptible nod. That was enough. Calder's throat moved. He took a breath, eyes flicking briefly to the patch. "I never thought I'd see that symbol again," he said. "They told me everyone from Fire Team 7 was lost in the crater." "They weren't wrong," she replied. Her voice was quiet, firm, like sand smoothed by water. "Only one made it to the other side." A pause. Calder's jaw tightened. "You carried them out," he said. "I carried what I could." She looked down, thumb brushing a bit of dust from the old patch stitched years ago over torn fabric, burned edges still visible beneath. Then she added, almost an afterthought, "I didn't keep the name, I kept the thread." Around them, cadets were no longer pretending not to watch. They were frozen dozens of men and women in clean uniforms, now staring at a woman they had laughed at hours earlier. Someone no one had saluted. Someone they didn't think had a name. General Calder stepped back, drew himself to attention, and did something no one expected. He raised his right hand, fingers squared, and saluted. Not the general's salute, not textbook, but a short, downward angle quick snap, then fist over heart. Ghostfire code. Only ever used between fire team leads on final extraction. The moment he did it, Mara's eyes dropped, just slightly. And then, for the first time in nearly 20 years, she saluted back. Not with ceremony, but with history, The kind you don't get from ribbons. Private Thorne felt goosebumps rise along his arms. Lieutenant Bishop was still staring, unsure whether he was watching a performance or a breach in time. But Danner knew. The old sergeant turned slowly to the younger men. "You just watched the highest-ranking man on this base salute a janitor," he said, voice low. "Except she's not a janitor." "Then who the hell is she?" Bishop asked. Danner didn't answer. But behind him, a whisper floated through the crowd. From Mejia, from an old file, from whatever rumor had never quite died. Ghostfire 3. The name no one had spoken since the records were burned. Mara Ellison didn't want the eyes. She'd spent years mastering the art of going unseen keeping. Her steps measured, her eyes down, her presence minimal. Her work was precise, her words rare, and it had worked. Until today, until a general removed his cap for her. Now the silence on the range was heavy. Not hostile but reverent, uncertain, like a chapel that had forgotten it was sacred. She didn't break it. Not until General Calder spoke again. "They told me the crater was unrecoverable," he said. "That there were no survivors." "There weren't," she replied. Calder frowned. "Then how are you here?" Mara looked down at her, hands still calloused, still scarred from heat and metal. She flexed her fingers like she was remembering how they once tore apart a bulkhead door with nothing but a broken crowbar and adrenaline. "I didn't survive it," she said softly. "I endured it." The general blinked. No war story ever began that way. Behind them, cadets had stopped moving entirely. Even the wind seemed to hold still. "I was a breach specialist for Fire Team 7, Mara continued. "We were dropped into the south rim of Kata's crater under blackout. Objective was human extraction intel," said 3 hostages. What they didn't say was the crater had collapsed 3 hours earlier. She took a slow breath. Her eyes never left the horizon, as if she still saw it there, the fire, the dust, the way time stretched and bent when bodies went missing. There was no exfil route, no comms. "We lost Barden first collapsed airway from blunt impact, then Pike when the ammo cooked off. I don't know how long I was down there after the second blast. Could have been hours. Could have been 2 days." "And then?" Calder asked, barely above a whisper. Mara looked at him. "I carried Brenner, half of him, hauled what was left through a collapsed tunnel and burned out my lungs on phosphor. I still don't see out of my left eye in the dark." She paused. "But I got far enough to trigger a heat signature spike. That's what brought the drone. That's what got me out." Calder said nothing. His expression was tight. The memories were thick in his throat now, too. "They offered me transfer to Arlington Medical after that," Mara said. "Then they changed their mind." She tapped the patch on her shoulder with 2 fingers. "They erased the team, said it compromised other operations, called it a necessary severance. Ghostfire 7 was declared terminated in the field. No living traces," the report said. Direct quote. Thorne could barely breathe. She was speaking like a woman reading her own eulogy. "I was told to hand over my insignia," Mara continued. "I refused. They said fine, but I wouldn't wear it anywhere official. So I sewed it into a jacket no one would look at. Figured if I wasn't going to be remembered, I'd still remember." She looked around for the first time at the cadets, the instructors, the structure she had worked beside for a decade. Her gaze landed on Bishop, whose face was still pale from shock. "I came here because no one asked questions. Because broken people can still tighten bolts, log ammo, and fix misaligned sights better than fresh hands can." Her voice didn't shake. It never had. But her eyes, those steel-gray eyes, were wet now. "I didn't need a title," she said. "I just needed to be somewhere it didn't hurt." No one moved. General Calder stepped forward. He reached into his chest pocket and pulled out a small silver pina flat, starless insignia, the kind worn by deep deployed command observers. He held it out. "Ghostfire never had a medal," he said. "The brass said visibility risk was too high. But I had these made anyway, just for the leads." Mara looked at it. She didn't take it. "You're not the only one who kept something," Calder added. "I've worn this under my collar for 17 years, waiting for a face that survived." Their eyes met. Then slowly, Mara reached out and closed her fingers around the pin. The cadets didn't cheer. There was no salute, no order shouted, no trumpet. But something passed through the group like a current of quiet shame, awe, and sudden clarity. Lieutenant Bishop dropped his gaze. His voice, so sharp earlier, now barely reached a whisper. I made fun of her jacket. Danner turned toward him, voice steady. You mocked the only person on this base who's fought in a place your textbooks won't mention. Bishop looked like he wanted to sink into the dirt. Thorne, still watching from the side, stepped forward. Ma'am? Mara turned slightly. He stood tall. Nervous, but sure. I'm sorry, he said. We didn't know. Mara really studied him for the first time. And then, a small smile. Tight. Honest. You looked anyway, she said. That was all. She stepped past them. Quiet. Unassuming again. But this time, the cadets made room. No one blocked her path. General Calder didn't stop her. He didn't salute again. He just watched her walk back toward the far end of the range toward the table, the thermos, the cleaning rods. Like she always had. But not like she used to. The range had never been this quiet. Not even during pre-dawn zeroing drills. Not during flag detail. And certainly not during the chaos of Week 2 live fire simulations. But now, with the sun dipping low over Redstone Ridge and the dust beginning to settle, the silence carried weight. Not tension, reverence. A kind no one had earned yet except the woman they all once ignored. Mara Ellison sat where she had always sat in the folding chair near the weapons table, sipping the last of her tea, back straight, eyes forward. She wasn't hiding anymore. She didn't need to. General Calder had returned to the SUV minutes earlier, saying nothing to the rest of the officers as he passed. He didn't need to explain. His salute had done the talking. Sergeant Danner stood a few yards from her now, arms crossed, watching as cadets moved differently, slower, more deliberate. They didn't gawk. They didn't whisper. They adjusted themselves quietly, like people walking through sacred ground. Thorne approached first. He carried a small notepad tucked under one arm, nothing official, just his own. He hesitated by her side. Ma'am, he said gently, could I ask you something? Mara turned slightly, brow raised. Did you stay here all these years because of them? Ghostfire, I mean? Her eyes softened. I stayed, she said, because silence is easier to survive than erasure, and because every now and then, someone like you still looks up. Thorne lowered his gaze, unsure how to hold the truth she just handed him. Bishop approached next, though slower. He was still in full uniform, sweat on his collar. His face had changed, drawn tighter, jaw set in discomfort. The man who once mocked her patch now looked like he was carrying something that didn't fit inside him anymore. He removed his cap. I said some things earlier, he began. Disrespectful things. Mara didn't interrupt. I thought you were. He shook his head. No excuse. She gave him nothing. Not cruelty, not kindness. Just the same silence she had always offered. That made it worse. Bishop swallowed. If there's any way I can make that right. Mara finally spoke. You already did, she said, nodding toward the space he had just cleared as he stepped aside. You moved. Bishop blinked. What? You moved out of the way. And she was right. He had. He looked down at the gravel beneath his boots and stepped back with a quiet, shaken nod. One by one, others followed. Not to speak, not to apologize, just to stand near her. No jokes, no laughter, just quiet presence. Mejia lingered the longest. As the sun lowered, she handed Mara a spare flask of tea, sealed, warm, unopened. You shouldn't have to drink alone anymore, she said simply. Mara took it. Didn't thank her with words. She nodded just once, and that was more than enough. At 1,900 hours, as taps began to play faintly from the far ridge, the cadets rose and began to file out. None of them looked back at her with pity. Not anymore. They looked back with recognition. And in a world where some names were designed to be forgotten, that was everything. The sun had dipped fully behind the hills now, casting long gold shadows over the gravel and concrete. The range was nearly empty, just the wind sweeping through steel target frames and a few last echoes of boots returning to barracks. Mara Ellison remained seated a moment longer. She'd seen many sunsets from this chair, but never one like this. Her tea was gone, her hands were clean. The box of tools sat closed beside her boots, all in order. She stood slowly, joints protesting just slightly too many years carrying things too heavy for one person, both seen and not. She adjusted her jacket, tugging the left sleeve gently back into place over the shoulder. The patch had always been hers. Now, somehow, it felt like theirs too. She reached down, picked up the box, and turned to leave. No fanfare. No applause. Just movement. Deliberate. Unshaken. As she crossed the lot behind the armory, a few figures moved aside without being asked. Not dramatically, just instinctively. They made space for her, like the earth shifting for an old tree. Like soldiers giving way to someone who had earned the right to walk anywhere without clearance. Lieutenant Bishop watched her go from the second-floor walkway. He didn't speak, didn't know how. His hands gripped the railing too tightly, as if to steady a part of himself that had been knocked loose. "She's just walking away?" one cadet whispered beside him. Bishop shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "She's always been walking away. We just never knew what she was walking from." In the distance, Private Thorne stood beside Sergeant Danner by the lockers, watching the same slow movement, one figure, alone, fading into the amber dusk. "I think she saved more people today than she did in that crater," Thorne said. Danner didn't reply immediately. "Then, maybe, but sometimes saving isn't about pulling someone from fire." He looked at the younger soldier. "Sometimes it's about showing them who stood in it and walked out." They watched as Mara passed the outer gate, a civilian ID clipped to her belt, her jacket still zipped halfway against the wind. The gate guard, usually indifferent, rose to his feet and gave her a small, sharp nod as she passed. She returned it. Nothing more. Just recognition. Later that night, the barracks were quieter than usual. Cadets moved slower, words were fewer. Even the loud ones, those who usually filled silence with bravado, were subdued. Thorne opened his locker, removed the standard issue range sheet, and flipped it over. On the back, he'd drawn something in pencil. A triangle. A broken ring. An arrow driven through both. He didn't write her name. He just folded the paper carefully and slid it into the back of his notebook. Not to share. Just to remember. And in the corner of the armory, on a bench that no one had sat on in weeks, someone had laid a folded military-issue field jacket. Clean. Neatly pressed. Just waiting. No one claimed it. They didn't need to. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room doesn't just leave an impression. She leaves a standard. Years from now, when Private Casey Thorne tried to explain it, he never used her name. Not because he forgot it, but because names were easy to erase. What she gave them couldn't be. He told the story like this. There was a woman once, quiet, older than most of us, came to the range every morning before the sun. She never yelled, never rushed. Just cleaned rifles, adjusted sights, handed us tools we didn't know we needed. People listening would nod politely. Some would ask, "An instructor?" "No," Thorne would say. She wore a jacket older than regulation, frayed sleeves, a patch no one could identify. We used to laugh about it. He always let that sentence hang in the air. Then he'd say, "Until the day the general showed up," and saluted her before speaking to anyone else. The room would usually fall silent after that, and he'd wait. Because silence, he had learned, was where the real things lived. Back at Redstone, the armory kept running. New cadets came through, loud and unsure. New lieutenants stood too tall. New drills scuffed the same gravel. But something had shifted. A photo appeared one week on the wall behind the cleaning bench. No label. Just a grainy black and white shot of an anonymous fire team moving through smoke, one figure barely visible at the front, smaller, but leading. Underneath it, someone had pinned a triangle-shaped scrap of fabric. Faded, burned at the edge. No one touched it. Not even the brass. And every morning, the chair she once sat in stayed where it was. No one dared move it. Not out of superstition. Out of respect. Thorne got promoted, moved on. He never became high-ranking. That had never been the goal. But every unit he entered, he brought a small patch in his inner pocket. Not standard. Not issued. Just pencil on canvas. A triangle. A broken ring. An arrow through both. Once, in a debriefing, a captain noticed it and asked where he'd gotten it. Thorne only smiled. "You wouldn't find it in the system," he said, "but it found me." As for her, Mara Elisanchi never came back to the range after that day. No one knew where she went. No forwarding address. No formal resignation. Just gone. Like she had only returned for one reason, and that reason was complete. But those who had seen her walk between the lanes with that old jacket never forgot it. Because sometimes, a legacy isn't carved in stone or etched in ribbons. It's sewn into a sleeve, carried in silence, passed, quietly, from one watchful soul to the next. Not remembered by rank, but by weight, by the kind of silence that commands attention, by the kind of person whose absence fills more space than most people ever do by standing in the center of the room. And somewhere, out there, maybe she's still walking, still carrying the ones who didn't make it, still watching to see who's ready to listen. This story isn't just about Mara Ellison or a forgotten patch sewn onto an old jacket. It's about seeing people, really seeing them beyond their clothes, their silence, or the roles we assume they play. Mara walked among soldiers who thought she was no one. But the truth was, she had carried more weight, more sacrifice, and more courage than most would ever know. And she never asked for applause. She just showed up, did the work, and stayed steady. In a world obsessed with visibility, this story reminds us, true worth doesn't need to announce itself. Sometimes the most powerful legacy is the one carried in silence past, not through words, but through presence, dignity, and quiet endurance. So before you judge someone by what they wear, how little they speak, or how invisible they seem, remember Mara. And look again. If this story moved you, leave a comment below with what moment hit hardest. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful human stories like this, because some truths deserve to be remembered. Thank you for listening.